Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Jeremy Barr. I'm Amelia, and we're going to talk about this really cool new Google product that was just launched called NotebookLM. Specifically, like if you've heard about it, maybe you've played around with it, we're going to dive into some of the cooler things that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about in terms of how this can provide value outside of just automating some of, the transition of one piece of content into multiple formats. And if you haven't heard about it, we're going to walk through like actually how it works and how cool this tool is. And again, like sort of precursors to what I personally and Jeremy and I thought could sort of be a demystification of what the future of learning could look like.
I love it. Let's dive in.
Cool. So everybody's talking about this new product. Again, if you haven't heard about it, go look it up. You can sign up for free. But Google just launched this new product. I think it's still kind of in beta, but called NotebookLM. And basically what you can do is you can take any piece of content, a PDF, text, you can, chat related prompts, things like that. You upload it into the system, and then it will basically allow you to spit that version of content out into a lot of other formats. So you can create, an FAQ doc about it, a study guide, a table of contents, a timeline, a briefing guide, and, you name it, any other type of content. One of the coolest aspects of this is that you can turn it into like basically audio, and it's what they call like the audio overview. And what the audio overview actually is when you actually try it this way is it turns this piece of content, whatever is an article, yada yada, into basically like a podcast episode or a podcast interview between this male and this female host. And it's so real. Like it absolutely feels like you're listening to these people. They're talking, they're engaging, they're having these conversations, they're interrupting each other. Like it's probably one of the most real AI conversational things that I've seen. And when I sort of discovered this and when I heard people talking about it, the first thing people sort of jump to, which is sort of the low-hanging fruit, is like, oh, wow, now I can basically create AI podcasts. I can feed it any content and it can use these two hosts and it can turn that into a podcast episode. And so I've seen people do that. I think you could probably, find a lot of new podcasts that are popping up, with these same voices. And that's great. And that's really cool, right? Like, let's get more content out there. But when I saw this feature, it unlocked something for me. And outside of just creating a podcast for it, the first thing I thought was, oh shit, this is going to change how we learn forever. Specifically in the context of how can we take one version of content, maybe it's an article, maybe it's a textbook, maybe it's a research paper, and how can we turn it into different formats of content that might fit a certain person's learning styles better. I hate reading. I can't even remember, the last time I was asked to read a textbook, and I probably just like scanned it and skimmed it. But like reading in general, especially like heavy content and educational focused articles, they take prolonged focus, they take a lot of energy, and in, our attention deficit economy and like how everybody has no patience anymore, I think reading and that style of reading is becoming a lot less popular. But podcasts at the same time have become really popular. And Jeremy, it's interesting, like, I listen to Andrew Huberman, right? And he talks about all these very scientific research-backed things, the cellular composition of, your metabolism and all of these other things, right? That he absolutely has, full research-backed articles on that I could go and read. I would never read them. And most, 90% of his listener base wouldn't, but they'll listen to him talk about it, even if they're like kind of confused of what that is, and what he's talking about. But they'll listen to him. And so a lot of, podcasts in general out there are very educational. They're, teaching somebody a subject, talking about it. And sort of begs the question, like, all right, well, why would I listen to him talk about this really complex research-backed thing? And why wouldn't I just read the article? Because I can do it on my time. I can, all of that sort of stuff. And I think the answer is, and this is one of the reasons why podcasts are so popular, is that, there's a natural like human element to it. So rather than this static like one-off thing that I have to, focus on, I can learn the same type of content in a very conversational human manner. In, one of, the main things, being auditory. And that's a huge reason why podcasts have sort of gained popularity. And so when I started playing around with this audio overview tool in NotebookLM, that was the first thing I thought. And I tried it out with a bunch of different, of like our methodology docs, how we create controlled groups for incrementality testing, what, the noisy IP pixel stuff, what happens and what goes on there. And even for somebody like me who's obsessed with this stuff and I would say knows it pretty well, there were elements of it that I retained better after listening to the podcast version of our content that was automatically created through this tool than I did just, having read this exact doc 100 different times over and over again.
Yeah, I think this is super important for people to realize that like it really does come down to not just, but it comes down to a learning style thing. Like we mechanistically looking at our eyes, like we like colors, we like depth. We're not meant for necessarily the best at looking at text on a black text on a web on a white piece of paper, right? Or even on a computer screen, right? Like we struggle to do that. Like even for people that like reading, like it's not the most optimal use of the human tools that you have. We are often hearing audio sounds and words a lot more often, and we like that a lot more than say reading, right? So to be able to take a boring PDF document or a boring document of anything and turn it into something that is auditory, and now it's like it was a single text document, and now two people are talking about it, right? So now it's like conversational. Now it's maybe turned into a storyline, whatever. And you still retain the word specificity in it, which is key. So now you're able to learn in a different way. Now you can go outside and walk, even if you weren't walking. Like you could in your house, like whatever, where you were reading, you could be listening. That's already like one enhancement. Upon reading, you're transferring it into the audio you're transferring it into the audio medium. And then also on top of that, you could be on the go in the car. You could be walking outside in nature and listening to this thing, maybe speeding it up by 2x or maybe adding another story component. As more and more iterations of this comes out, it's going to be suited. People are going to make it to where it's suited towards specific learning styles on, okay, it's two people talking or three people talking, or they're talking in a storyline way, or it's longer stories about a specific example because maybe somebody needs a longer story versus some people are going to want shorter stories about it. Maybe it's not story at all. Maybe it's audio, but in bullet point format. The fact that we can engineer now a lot of different outputs in this audio is really, really powerful.
Well, and exactly. And don't get me wrong, like there's lots of apps right now where you can like take a picture of some sort of textbook page and it'll like, basically read it to you. And so that's great. Like that's sort of the first step. But again, is what you're getting at is like, this is different. It's not just reading me what the article said or creating, AI's version of it, maybe, better designed, better structured, so it's easier to learn. It again is actually, turning it into a conversation between these two hosts. And we'll like show an example because it is so real. And it literally feels like these two people are like, going back and forth and chatting, and again, like they're interrupting each other, like it's so authentic. And so I think it's like a step further than just having something where you can turn some static, text-based thing into something that's auditory. It's also, again, bringing in that, human narrative, like nature of how, again, we communicate as human beings, in, again, what a podcast format is. So, the first thing I thought, again, is like, this is great. This is now it's a podcast episode, but it opened my mind to be exactly what you said. There's so many different ways we could turn this content into other formats. Maybe it's a video, right? Maybe the next version of this is I can upload, the same text and it'll turn it into a simple video because maybe I learn, visually a little bit better. So I just think this is the beginning of how we can use AI to curate learning, as you said, based on people's different learning preferences, rather than what, I think everybody's thinking about this tool as is, oh, now I can just, create podcasts automatically. So cool and so much in here. Should I share my screen and sort of show you how to do it?
Yep. Yeah, we have about 60 seconds or so left, so I don't know how long the demo is, but like let's dive into the demo. Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. Finish my screen. All right. So you go into NotebookLM. Again, you can create a free account if you haven't done this before, and you upload a source. You can connect it to Google Drive. You can paste text. You can add a YouTube link, which is another really cool thing. But let's just grab our How Podcast Attribution and Pixel-Based Attribution Works article. I'm just going to long doc, a lot of context, a lot of nuance in here. And again, I've read this, 1,000 times. So I'm going to paste a text here. I'm just going to paste the article, literally as simple as that. And it's going to generate right here. It's going to do that. Now let's jump over. All right. So now after we uploaded that, here's what you get. So this is, the guide of how pixel-based attribution works. So it gives you a summary. Again, we can turn it into an FAQ, a study guide, but here's the actual audio. And here's how it turned it into a podcast. So let's just skip to the first 15 seconds. I'm going to put it on 2x speed. And we'll go.
Aren't always clear, clickable links between hearing a podcast ad and, going and actually buying something, right?
Right. So how do they measure anything? Our source material starts with the dynasty.
Okay.
What can we learn podcast attribution from like his experience.
Well, Stephen's journey is a good example of how attribution often works. Let's say he's listening to a podcast and he hears an ad for, let's say, Athletic Greens. Behind the scenes, the podcast platform registers that his device linked to his IP address downloaded that specific app. Think of an IP address, like a digital address for your internet.
Okay, so they connected his IP address to the ad.
Right.
What happens next?
So a few days later, Stephen decides, you know what, I'm going to buy some Athletic Greens. He visits their website, makes a purchase, and boom, the website recognizes that same IP address from the podcast download. That's basic podcast attribution in action, matching an ad impression to a purchase using IP addresses.
So it's like a digital breadcrumb trail.
Yeah.
But the source mentioned it's not always that straightforward.
Right.
What makes it so tricky?
Well, one of the big challenges is that podcasting relies on these, household IP addresses rather than individual user data. So if someone else in Stephen's house bought Athletic Greens after hearing the same ad, it would still get linked back to Stephen's initial download.
Ah, that makes sense.
Right.
So how do they know who actually bought the product?
Well, that's where it gets even trickier. They use a combination of methods, but it still involves a lot of educated guesses.
Yeah.
And sometimes those guesses can be thrown off by what are called noisy IPs.
Okay, noisy IPs, that sounds, well, messy.
Yeah.
What are those?
Imagine you're in a crowded place with lots of people using their phones on the same, cellular network, like a busy airport or a shop. In those situations, many devices might share the same IP address provided by the network. These shared IP addresses are the noisy IPs.
So if a bunch of people in that coffee shop buy Athletic Greens after...
Boom. I mean, what, Jeremy? Like, what? How good was that?
Wild. Like your guys' documentation about pixel-based attribution, and then it's just like conversation.
It's and you can see, right? Like they're talking at each other. They're actually like it's just so beautiful. It's such a like massive leap from, oh, I'm just going to turn this into something that's audio now so that I can listen to it on the go, into they're literally having a conversation with it. And again, I have literally read this doc 10,000 times, highlighted it, annotated it, all of that sort of stuff. And hearing them talk about it in this way, in that conversational manner, there were things that clicked for me and ways that I could talk about it that, again, rooted in that narrative and that storytelling, just absolutely changed my fundamental way of how I understood it.
Love it. We are at the end of this video. Thank you for sharing this today.
Thank you.